Tonight on Ukraine Today, mirror response. Belgorod in Russia and parts of the region were left without electricity and water. In some areas, there are also problems with heating. American absurdity. How did Washington react to Russia breaking the so-called energy ceasefire? The White House game. Should we ignore the words of the American leader? And are the actions of the US administration really aimed at weakening the Kremlin regime? NATO forces in Ukraine. What else do the security guarantees from Western partners include? All this and more right now. Hello, I'm Volodymyr Rabchun and this is Ukraine Today. Please subscribe, hit the like button. Let's move on to the news. We begin with the Ukraine's mirror response to Russian strikes on our energy infrastructure. Belgorod and parts of the region were left without electricity and water. Russian so-called media also report that in some places there are also problems with heating. Alpha units, special forces of the Security Service of Ukraine, have set a new record in shooting down enemy drones. Over the past year, they destroyed 2,220 Russian attack and reconnaissance UAVs. Next, more details on what is happening right now on the battlefield.
Another push by the Russian army, which could drag on for years. The Kremlin is planning to advance on Ukraine's fortress belt.
These are the four main industrial centers of the Donetsk region, which are under the control of Ukraine's defense forces. This is the so-called Sloviansk-Kramatorsk agglomeration. Sloviansk, Kramatorsk, Kostiantynivka and Drushkivka.
A new report from the Institute for the Study of War states that Russian troops are not ready for a rapid ground offensive on Ukraine's so-called fortress belt, and they will not be able to launch such actions from the north or east for at least several more months.
This is a densely built-up urban area, plus an extensive so-called industrial zone, which nullifies the possibility of capturing them in the foreseeable future. To understand the situation, take Bakhmut as an example. The city is much smaller in territorial terms. The fighting there lasted about 9 months. The occupiers' losses, according to various estimates, amounted to between 70,000 and 90,000 personnel.
To accelerate their advance in the Lyman direction, the Russian command will have to redeploy significant resources, particularly infantry and UAV operators, which could weaken other sections of the front, such as offensive actions near Pokrovsk or the defense in the Kupiansk direction.
At the moment, the occupiers have just become more active. There is fighting and clashes in the Sloviansk-Kramatorsk direction. Moreover, we are talking about attempts by the occupiers to break through the defenses of the Ukrainian defense forces. Both in the Kostiantynivka direction, these are extremely heavy battles in the area of the Klebanbik reservoir. Fighting is also taking place on the outskirts of Kostiantynivka itself, as well as, accordingly, attempts by the occupiers to carry out so-called flanking maneuvers against the positions of the Ukrainian defense forces. This is an offensive from the direction of the captured Siversk and an advance toward Lyman.
The increased activity of the occupiers in the Kupiansk direction was aimed at capturing the strategic railway station Kupiansk-Uzlovyi, which would have allowed the occupiers to redeploy personnel to form a strike group targeting advances in the area of Sloviansk and Kramatorsk. However, things didn't turn out the way Putin wanted. He had hoped. Nevertheless, the Kremlin has no intention of admitting its vulnerability or the loss of Kupiansk-Uzlovyi.
You know what the difference is? The difference between the Russian chief of the general staff and a Ukrainian battalion commander? I don't lie. When I say that Kupiansk-Uzlovyi is Ukrainian, I mean it. But Gerasimov says otherwise.
Moreover, just to cobble together another propaganda video, the Russian command sends its soldiers straight into the hands of the Ukrainian armed forces.
Anton Alexievich, as you can see, Valery Vasilievich is in body armor, wearing a helmet, and armed in Banazheriet. And I'm damned if I know. I honestly think Valery Vasilievich. When President Putin asks you today, why exactly did this happen? And another video from Russian Uzlovol is being filmed by a Ukrainian lieutenant colonel. Just tell him these are the peculiarities of hybrid warfare.
Putin also keeps sending his soldiers to be taken out by Ukrainian drones. There are dozens of videos to prove it, showing frozen, starving and wounded Russians. And here is the destruction of a Russian TOS-1 Solntsepyok by Ukrainians in the Belgorod region. A drone of unknown origin crashed on January 28 at a military base in the Polish city of Przasnysz. The unit specializes in reconnaissance and electronic warfare, including in the area of the Suwałki corridor. That is a location considered a potential staging ground for Russia to seize territory in Poland and the Baltic states.
At the moment, according to official information, the object that fell on the territory of the military base is, according to preliminary data, a toy drone. It fell on the territory of the military base, 70 meters from the ammunition depots. This is quite telling. The second catastrophic mistake on the Polish side is that the servicemen picked up the drone without having it examined by specialists. They brought it from the crash site directly into the barracks. In other words, all of this points to a complete lack of professionalism on the Polish side when it comes to potentially countering aerodynamic means of attack, launched either from the territory of the Russian Federation or accordingly from the territory of the Republic of Belarus.
Drones from Cyprus are playing a significant role on the front in Ukraine, writes The Independent. The manufacturing company claims that more than 200 of its H-10 Poseidon drones are helping Ukrainian artillery to detect targets in any weather conditions. Over the past 3 years, these devices have already logged more than 100,000 flight hours.
One of the most massive attacks on Ukraine's energy system. This is how Energy Minister Denis Shmyhal commented on the Russian strike carried out on Tuesday night. According to him, the enemy damaged power generation facilities, main lines and distribution networks in Kyiv, Kharkiv, Dnipro, Donetsk, Odessa, Vinnytsia and other regions. Repairs, the minister said, will take a long time. Trump was not surprised by Russia's massive attack on Ukraine. This was stated by White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt while speaking to the media. But there was one interesting moment. A short dialogue took place between her and a journalist.
President Trump was talking yesterday about how President Putin had agreed to a week-long halt on attacks on Ukraine because of the cold weather. But today we've seen that Russia has launched some of the heaviest attacks this month. What's your reaction to that?
Yeah, I spoke with the president about it this morning, and his reaction was unfortunately unsurprised. These are two countries who have been engaged in a very brutal war for several years, a war that would have never started if the president were still in office. It started because of the weakness and incompetence of the previous president, Joe Biden.
Enough. Just enough. Stop treating us like fools. What does Biden have to do with this? Putin started this war. And how can you base an answer about the real ongoing war in a hypothetical scenario? What might have happened if Trump had remained president? That reality does not exist. But there is another reality. Trump said he had agreed with the Russian dictator on a one-week energy ceasefire, and Russia violated it, if such agreement even existed. And I'm not even touching the core of the answer itself. Trump's reaction was unsurprised. These are two countries who have been engaged in a very brutal war for several years. What is that supposed to mean? That Trump made a deal knowing it wasn't really a deal, but decided to say it was so everyone would think he's a real deal maker? Sorry, but this sounds like nonsense. It also feels like a parallel reality, one where Putin actually kept his word. Maybe Washington sees a different picture of the world? Otherwise, how can we explain what Donald Trump said?
It was Sunday to Sunday, and it opened up, and he hit him hard last night. No, he agreed, he kept his word on that. It's a lot. 1 week is, we'll take anything because it's really, really cold over there.
From Sunday to Sunday, so from January 25th to February 1st. Okay, but already on Friday night, January 30th, a Russian strike on gas infrastructure in the Donetsk region was recorded. And Mr. President of the United States, I wouldn't say that 1 week is some great achievement of the American administration. 1 week is exactly the time Russia needs to prepare another massive strike, which is exactly what happened. So this is not about agreements with Putin. It's about Russia's limited ability to continuously hit Ukraine's energy system. I understand emotions. Emotions are speaking right now. And yes, emotions can sometimes prevent us from seeing other details. There is a chance that the American president is deliberately praising the Russian dictator with words, while the actual actions of the US administration are aimed at weakening the Kremlin regime.
Is this friendship or a survival game?
A very good afternoon to you, my dear neighbor. It truly is wonderful to see you looking so incredibly healthy, alive and well today.
Trump is determined to strangle Russia.
American oil companies will enter Venezuela.
The US president has pulled out the economic and petrodollar pressure that Putin was so afraid of. And
Our oil will be cut off. Well, at least it will be cut off somehow, although they won't be able to do it. It's just that, in fact, it's not. It's impossible as of today.
Putin's entire economy is tied to one single factor, the global price of oil. For years, Venezuela has been part of the game.
Based on the latest data from global geointelligence reports, it is estimated that approximately 20% of the entire world's proven oil reserves are currently located within the borders of Venezuela.
Starting in 2020, the Russian state company Rosarubezhneft acquired stakes in almost all of the country's key oil projects. For Moscow, this was strategic gold. The Kremlin gained leverage over the total volume of oil on the global market.
Venezuela served as an important representative of the interests, if you will, of the countries of the global south, and above all, of China and the Russian Federation on the continent.
Many countries were hooked on Putin's oil needle. But after the operation in Venezuela and the arrest of Nicolas Maduro, this scheme fell apart.
Maduro is a staunch and vocal supporter of Putin, among other things. And this will certainly and significantly hit Putin's interests, because it directly affects the operations of the entire oil tanker fleet. A significant amount of Russian oil, including that sent to Venezuela, is processed at various oil refineries and then sold within the United States of America. So it would seem, what does the Russian Federation or Putin have to do with it? But in reality, the United States is buying their raw materials just through Venezuelan refineries.
The fate of Venezuela's oil fields now depends entirely on the administration of Donald Trump.
Oil and gas are not our advantage. As you can see, both oil and gas can drop in price. Our advantage is Putin.
India is one of the world's largest buyers of oil. It supported the Kremlin thanks to its purchases. But that won't happen anymore. Modi will start buying oil from Venezuela in exchange for a trade deal with the US.
He agreed to stop buying Russian oil and to buy much more from the United States and potentially from Venezuela. This will help end the war in Ukraine, which is ongoing right now with thousands dying every week.
Trump reached an agreement with Modi that the US will lower tariffs on Indian imports from 25% to 18%, and India will move toward a complete removal of tariffs and non-tariff barriers for imports from the US. Let us recall that in August, Trump imposed tariffs of 50% on goods from India, which included a 25% surcharge as a punitive measure for purchasing Russian oil. That's why such a deal is very relevant for Modi. He also promised to buy more than $50 billion worth of American products.
When two large economies and the world's biggest democratic countries work together, it benefits our peoples and opens up huge opportunities for mutual cooperation.
This will deal a serious blow to the Kremlin. After all, it was India that became the largest maritime buyer of Russian oil after 2022. Moreover, it was being sold at a discount. This money was one of the key ways to replenish the Russian budget at a time when sales of Russian gas and oil to the West had been halted.
If, so to speak, the balance on the world markets changes, and since such a substantial and significant portion of global production essentially falls directly under the strategic control and influence of the United States, it naturally follows that the states continue to increase their reach. The overall strategic stability, the consistency of monetary stability, and the oil and petroleum products market will increasingly depend on the specific will of Washington and influence the fluctuation of global market prices, especially for Brent crude.
Trump didn't stop there. The US president stated that China could also make a great deal with the US to buy Venezuelan oil. According to Trump, Cuba will also want to sign a deal to buy oil.
It is completely and utterly impossible to even imagine that the sudden and significant loss of, say, Russian oil volumes would permit both the global energy sector and the world economy to remain stable.
It is worth noting that for the US to exert significant pressure, they will have to invest in Venezuela, which has been left to fend for itself for years.
In fact, he did not develop and sometimes even destroyed, perhaps unintentionally, what had already been created before him in terms of oil production. And these 18% of the world's oil is just a nominal figure, which would require millions of dollars in investment.
Venezuelan oil in Trump's hands would drive down prices and push Russian oil out of Western countries. And accordingly, Putin will never again see the kind of revenues that existed before. This means the end has come for the global ambitions of the Kremlin dictator.
We need to keep hammering away. The EU is preparing a new major package of sanctions specifically against third countries, against buyers of Russian oil and against oil refineries.
Well, and we will continue to do our job, push for sanctions and strike the enemy on the battlefield.
Ukraine is fighting for freedom. Support independent Ukrainian journalism so we can keep telling the truth about Russia's war. Click the link in the description to become our sponsor. Now's the time to subscribe, like this video and share it so more people can see it. Thank you and glory to Ukraine. Republican Senator Lindsey Graham has called on Trump to transfer Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine. In his post, Graham said that the pressure the United States is currently putting on Putin to force him to the negotiation table and stop massive attacks on Ukraine is not working. Russian forces carried out a massive Shahed drone attack on Odessa. More than 20 residential buildings were damaged, along with 2 kindergartens and a school. 2 people were injured. Earlier, Russians shelled Zaporizhzhia, hitting a residential neighborhood. At least 2 people were killed and 8 were injured, including 3 children. The Ukrainian delegation has arrived in Abu Dhabi for a new round of trilateral peace talks. Meanwhile, some details have emerged about agreements between Ukraine, the United States and European partners regarding security guarantees. According to available information, these guarantees include the deployment of NATO forces in Ukraine within 72 hours in the event of a renewed Russian attack after a peace agreement is signed.
A warning within 24 hours and a military strike within 72 hours involving NATO forces. The security guarantees for official Kyiv, which have been discussed by delegations from the US, Europe and Ukraine since last year, have become known. Thus, according to information from the Financial Times, Kyiv and its partners in Europe and the US have agreed on a multi-level plan designed to ensure Russia's compliance with a future ceasefire agreement in the war with Ukraine.
The first response to Russia's violation of the ceasefire will come within 24 hours. It will include diplomatic warnings and actions by the Ukrainian army necessary to stop the violation, 3 sources told the Financial Times. If hostilities continue after that, a second phase of intervention will be launched, involving the use of a coalition of willing forces.
In particular, the United States, several EU members, as well as the United Kingdom, Norway, Iceland and Turkey are ready to support the Ukrainian armed forces on the 3rd day.
The United Kingdom and France have promised to send troops and weapons to Ukraine as part of security guarantees supported by the United States, which are intended to reinforce a 20-point peace plan aimed at ending the war, the publication states. Europe-led deterrence forces will have to conduct operations in the air, at sea, and on land after the ceasefire, with intelligence and logistical support from the United States.
Meanwhile, analysts note that the details of the agreement remain unclear since it implies actions by the Allies after a ceasefire in Ukraine, while the terms of a possible truce have yet to be agreed upon. Security guarantees have also not yet been formalized with signatures, which also allows some countries to back out of future commitments.
In any case, this strategic deployment will be based entirely on our own professional army. The second part is EU membership as part of the security guarantees and the backstop force that will be provided by the United States. But this will become much more evident and clear at a later stage, specifically when certain official documents and legislative papers are finally signed and approved by the US Congress. What this will look like in the end depends heavily on what the Europeans are willing to do if Russia attacks us again, and what specific strategic actions the United States will take to intervene.
At the same time, the NATO Secretary General, who arrived in Kyiv on February 3rd and experienced firsthand what a massive shelling of the Ukrainian capital is like, assured that the alliance countries supporting the plan will not abandon it.
Ukraine requires robust and long-term security guarantees and steadfast international commitments. that we will provide immediate and necessary assistance whenever it is required. And for this, the Coalition of the Willing provides for a backstop system, insurance from the United States, and the provision of military assistance to the armed forces in Ukraine.
At the same time, experts are already asking how exactly will NATO armies be able to help us if time and again statements are made in Europe that the alliance will only be ready for war in the 2030s.
You might ask, what kind of military response is this, considering that, as we've discussed many times, Europe simply no longer has the forces needed to operate on the ground in sufficient numbers? This is mainly a story about aviation, because where Russia has a significant advantage is precisely in the skies. And in fact, if the European armies had intervened for Ukraine in terms of air power, for example, at the start of the full-scale invasion, if they had closed the skies over Ukraine so that Russian planes simply couldn't fly there at all, the situation would have developed very differently.
At the same time, the not-so-accidental, as many believe, leak of Ukrainian guarantees to the British press on the eve of the talks plays a crucial role for the negotiations in the Ukraine, US and Russia format, which will continue today. This is so that Putin's team understands in advance. Demanding an end to support for post-war Ukraine is pointless.
In the context of, for example, the negotiations currently underway, of course, this not only can, but must become one of the elements of the system of security guarantees that will be offered to Ukraine. This is a very important point. This absolutely must be spelled out, and it can apply both to NATO as a whole and to individual countries. Moreover, we have more than 24 security agreements with various countries, and these agreements guarantee us certain types of support: consultative, financial, military, technical, and various others, which without a doubt form the foundation of the country's security in the future.
As has been increasingly noted in Europe, this also forms the basis of their own security. Against the backdrop of unidentified drones flying over, the open transfer of Orsha units to Belarus with an eye on the EU, and the restoration of Russian military bases on the NATO border, Ukraine is ceasing to be a buffer zone and is becoming almost the main guarantor of Europe's security.
Now, Europe and Ukraine are already forming an inseparable and indivisible system of European security, as it is called in the European capitals themselves. It has become clear that Ukraine is not a buffer, but rather a part of the common European security space. After all, without Ukraine, it was thought that Europe was stronger and that Ukraine was just a buffer, but it turned out that's not the case. Without Ukraine, Europe is much weaker, and with Ukraine, on the contrary, it can become stronger.
At the same time, how Russia will react to the information about Ukrainian guarantees, we will find out very soon as Putin is informed that Dmitriev and his associates failed today to persuade the West to back down.
We're following the developments. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. Thank you for your support. Strength to Ukraine's defenders. Glory to Ukraine. Like, subscribe, comment, share, and see you next time.